You've been asking God to speak, but what if He already is? What if the silence you're feeling isn't His absence, but your distraction? What if the whispers are there, but you've been tuning into everything else so loudly that you can't hear them? Because right now, in the middle of your chaos, your questioning, your confusion, God is speaking, and not in thunder or lightning, but in ways you never expected. The question isn't, is He speaking? The question is, are you ready to listen? You want direction, clarity, breakthrough, and you've cried out, God, speak to me. But maybe the issue isn't that God isn't speaking. Maybe it's that you're not still enough to hear. The noise of life has gotten so loud. The pressure, the notifications, the opinions of people, the pace of the world, and somewhere in the middle of it, your soul has forgotten how to be quiet, forgotten how to listen. You've equated God's voice with a feeling, but feelings are fleeting. His voice isn't always emotional, it's spiritual, it's sacred, and it requires stillness to recognize. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." But you haven't been still, have you? You've been running after answers, after healing, after reassurance, and all the while, God has been waiting, not because He's distant, but because He doesn't compete with chaos. He speaks in stillness, and stillness terrifies a culture addicted to noise. You've been so focused on what you want Him to say that you've missed what He's already said. Hebrews 4:12 reminds us that His word is living and active, not stale, not outdated, not silent. If you haven't heard God lately, maybe it's time to go back to what He already said. Back to the scriptures you used to cling to. Back to the verses that once made your heart burn. Because His voice isn't just in what's new, it's in what's eternal. And sometimes, the most powerful word God speaks isn't a fresh revelation. It's a holy reminder, a whisper of what you already know, but stopped believing. You're waiting for a sign, but He's waiting for surrender. You've been asking Him to shout, but He's been whispering, because the whisper requires closeness. That's how He draws you in, not with spectacle, but with intimacy. Like in 1 Kings 19, when Elijah was desperate to hear God, and God wasn't in the wind, or the earthquake, or the fire, but in the still small voice. That whisper wasn't weak. It was intentional. Because God doesn't scream for your attention like the world does. He draws near to those who draw near to Him. James 4:8. And if you want to hear His voice, you've got to lower the volume of everything else. But let's be honest, it's easier to scroll than to seek, easier to vent to friends than to listen in prayer, easier to binge Netflix than to open your Bible, and the enemy knows it. That's why distraction is one of his favorite weapons. He doesn't need to destroy you. He just needs to drown out the voice that would restore you. He'll flood your mind with fear, your calendar with busyness, your heart with comparison, anything to keep you from the quiet place where God speaks. Because the moment you hear His voice, everything changes. Confusion breaks, fear flees, direction comes, identity is restored, and the enemy loses the grip he had through distraction. So, the question isn't just, God, are you speaking? The question is, am I really listening? Listening looks like turning down the noise. It looks like waking up early just to be with Him. It looks like opening His word not just for knowledge, but for encounter. It looks like silencing every other voice so you can hear the only one that matters. Jesus said in John 10:27, "My sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me. If you're not hearing him, it's not because he's forgotten you. It's because you've been surrounded by voices that sound louder than the shepherd. You want confirmation, but you need conviction. You want a new word, but you've ignored the last one. You've prayed, God, what's next? And he's whispered, did you do what I asked last time? Obedience always precedes revelation. God doesn't waste his words on ears that won't act on them. He's not silent. He's strategic. He's waiting for your yes, your real yes. The one that doesn't just nod during a sermon, but gets up on Monday morning and walks in faith. And if you would stop searching for the spectacular and start listening for the sacred, you'd hear him again. This is why your soul has felt dry, why your prayers feel hollow. It's not that God is distant. It's that you've been distant. You've been busy doing things for God, but you haven't just been with him. Ministry has replaced intimacy. Activity has replaced alignment. But Jesus didn't die so you could be productive. He died so you could be connected. And connection requires attention. Real, undistracted, reverent attention. Maybe that's why this season feels uncomfortable. Maybe God allowed the noise to overwhelm you so you'd finally crave the quiet. Maybe the silence isn't punishment. Maybe it's an invitation to come back to the place where you hear him best. The secret place. The place where you're not performing, not pretending, not proving, just listening. That's where the power is. That's where clarity returns. That's where purpose is reignited. Not in the platform, but in the presence. And right now, God is whispering again, in the stillness, in the quiet moments between your questions. He's saying, I never left. I've been here the whole time. Are you ready to listen now? But even as he whispers, something in you resists. You're afraid, not of the silence, but of what he might say if you actually stopped long enough to hear him. Because deep down, you already know. You know he might call you to leave the relationship that's been slowly draining your soul. You know he might ask you to forgive the person you've held bitterness against for years. You know he might tell you to step into something that terrifies your flesh, but awakens your spirit. And that kind of clarity is costly. That kind of direction demands obedience. So you've numbed yourself with noise, not because you don't want to hear him, but because you're afraid you will. But the voice of God doesn't come to control you. It comes to free you. Jesus said in John 8:32, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The voice of God is not a prison. It's the key. It doesn't bring shame. It brings healing. But the enemy will twist it. He'll make you believe that if you really listen to God, you'll lose something. But the only thing you'll lose is what was never meant to stay. Because what God speaks may shake your world, but it will never shatter your identity. It will reveal it. You've been wondering why nothing feels like it fits anymore. Your plans, your goals, your routines. That's not confusion. That's transition. God is shifting you, and your soul can feel it. He's weaning you off the old, breaking the false attachments, calling you into deeper alignment with his will. And the more you resist it, the more exhausted you become. You weren't meant to carry what he's already called you to lay down. You weren't built to thrive in environments that suffocate your calling, that tension you're feeling, that internal unrest. That's God's voice, not shouting, but stirring. And in that stirring, he's asking you to trust him, even when the path is unclear, even when the answers don't come wrapped in certainty. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." But trust like that, it costs you. It costs your logic. It costs your timeline. It costs the illusion of control. But it gives you something priceless in return: peace. Not circumstantial peace, but soul-deep peace. The kind that anchors you when everything else is shifting. And that's what you need right now. Not more information, not another opinion. You need an encounter. You need the kind of word that doesn't just answer your question. It rewrites your heart. And that word doesn't come through striving. It comes through surrender, through sitting in the quiet and saying, "Speak, Lord. Your servant is listening." That was Samuel's prayer. In 1 Samuel 3:10, he was just a boy. No title, no experience, just availability. And God spoke to him in the dark. That's all God needs. Not perfection, not performance, just presence. But when's the last time you prayed like that? Really prayed? Not just listed your requests, but sat and waited? When's the last time you gave God space to speak without rushing to move? Because real intimacy doesn't happen on the go. It happens in the pause, in the holy moments when you shut the world out and invite heaven in. That's where conviction is birthed. That's where boldness is forged. That's where the fire gets reignited. Not through hype, but through His holy hush. You've been wondering why the fire's gone out. Why you used to feel close to Him, but now feel numb. It's not because He left. It's because you stopped listening. Somewhere along the way, you traded intimacy for activity. You got caught up doing things for God and forgot how to just be with Him. But Revelation 2:4 speaks to this exact moment. "Yet I hold this against you. You have forsaken the love you had at first." That fire you lost, it wasn't stolen. It was starved. And the only way to reignite it is to return. Return to the quiet place. Return to the posture of listening. Return to the love that used to make your heart ache. God is not trying to impress you. He's trying to reach you. And He's not waiting for you to be perfect. He's waiting for you to be present. Right now, as you are. Tired, angry, confused. He can handle it all. Just bring Him your heart. That's what He wants. More than your talent, more than your success, more than your ministry. He wants you. And if you'd just stop, really stop, you'd hear it again. That still small voice. The one that calls you by name. The one that reminds you who you are. The one that breaks every lie and heals every wound. The one that whispers, "You're not too far. You're not too late. I've been here all along." So now the question comes again, but deeper. Are you ready to listen? Because He's speaking. And when you do listen, really listen, everything begins to shift. Your appetite changes. What used to entertain you now grieves you. What once distracted you now feels empty. Because when the voice of God becomes your source, everything else loses its grip. The counterfeit starts to show. The noise begins to irritate. The shallow things that used to satisfy no longer do, because your soul has tasted something real. That's the power of His voice. It ruins you for anything less. But you have to protect it, because once you've heard Him clearly, the enemy will do everything in his power to drown it out, not with demons in the dark, but with distractions that look harmless, endless scrolling, toxic conversations, busy schedules, The enemy knows he can't stop God from speaking, so he'll try to keep you from hearing. He'll fill your life with just enough chaos to keep your soul from settling into stillness. He'll make noise feel normal and silence feel threatening. But you weren't created to live in static. You were created to hear the shepherd. Jesus said in John 10:27, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." That means the voice of God is not reserved for the elite. It's not just for pastors or prophets. It's for you. You, the one who's doubting if God still speaks. You, the one who's convinced you missed it. You, the one who thinks you're too broken to be used. If you belong to Him, then hearing Him is your inheritance, and no amount of failure can cancel that promise. But here's the thing. The voice of God doesn't always sound like what you expect. It's not always thunder and fire. Sometimes, it's a question that won't leave you, a verse that keeps coming back, a heaviness that won't lift until you respond. It's not about volume, it's about clarity. It's about knowing that when He speaks, something inside you stands at attention, something in you shifts. You recognize it, not with your ears, but with your spirit. That's why Elijah, even after fire and earthquake and wind, only responded to the still small voice, because God isn't interested in performing. He's interested in proximity. And that's where this battle gets real, because proximity costs. It costs your comfort, your convenience, your control. You can't stay close and stay casual. You can't walk in intimacy and live in compromise. The closer you get to His voice, the clearer you'll see the things you need to let go of. Not out of legalism, but out of love. He'll start pruning you, not to punish you, but to make room for more. More of His presence, more of His purpose, more of His power. John 15:2 says, "Every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes, that it may bear more fruit." That means the discomfort you're feeling might not be the enemy. It might be God lovingly cutting away what no longer aligns with your destiny. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it's confusing. But don't mistake pruning for punishment. It's preparation. It's God getting you ready to carry the weight of the word He's about to speak next. Because every revelation comes with responsibility. Every word He speaks is an invitation to deeper surrender. So, what has He been whispering to you lately? Not what others have said, not what religion has taught, but what has God been whispering to your heart when it's quiet? Maybe it's a dream you buried years ago, a calling you've been running from, a healing you've refused to receive. His voice always calls you closer, not just to the next thing, but to Him, because purpose without presence is hollow, and calling without communion will crush you. God isn't just speaking to send you, He's speaking to sustain you. And here's the sacred part. Once you begin to listen, you become dangerous. Not because you're loud, not because you're famous, but because now you move by revelation, not reaction. You walk by faith, not fear. You don't need external validation to confirm internal conviction. You don't need a platform to obey the prompting. When God says move, you move. When He says wait, you wait. And hell hates that kind of obedience, because it means that you've tuned your ear to heaven. And once you hear Him, really hear Him, you can't unhear Him. You've tasted the truth. You've heard the whisper, and now you know too much to go back. But once you've heard Him, the enemy knows he can't silence the truth. So he'll do the next best thing. Confuse it, twist it, bury it in noise, He'll send voices that sound like wisdom, but carry fear. He'll disguise distraction as divine timing. He'll imitate what God sounds like, but always with a string attached, always with fear at the root. Because Satan knows Scripture too. He quoted it to Jesus in the wilderness. But notice the difference. Jesus quoted the word from relationship. The enemy quoted it out of manipulation. That's why discernment matters now more than ever. Because in this generation, there are more voices than ever. Everyone has a message. Everyone has a platform. Everyone is speaking. But few are listening. And you? You're not called to echo the crowd. You're called to echo heaven. That means you have to be tuned in to the frequency of God's voice, so that when the counterfeit comes, your spirit immediately knows, that's not my shepherd. Because the sheep may not understand everything, but they know their shepherd's voice. And don't be surprised if what God speaks to you doesn't make sense to anyone else. It wasn't supposed to. Noah built an ark when there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Abraham left his home without a map. Mary believed the impossible before she saw the miracle. Why? Because they listened. They obeyed a word that hadn't been fulfilled yet. And that kind of obedience confuses the carnal. It offends the logical, but it moves the heart of God, because God doesn't always speak for your understanding. He speaks for your alignment. He doesn't reveal the whole plan. He gives you one step, one instruction, one nudge, and you obey, not because you've seen the outcome, but because you trust the voice. That's faith. That's maturity. That's how revival starts. Not with a microphone, but with someone saying yes in the secret place. That's what he's after. Not performance, not perfection, just surrender. But let's be honest, surrender isn't glamorous. It's gritty. It's lonely. It's full of moments where God is speaking, but everything around you contradicts what he said. It's waking up with a word in your spirit and a war in your mind. It's trusting the vision when the provision hasn't shown up yet. It's still showing up when nothing makes sense. It's listening, even when it hurts. And sometimes, God will go silent, not because he's left you, but because he's already spoken, and now he's waiting for your obedience. You keep asking for a new word, but heaven is waiting on your response to the last one. The silence isn't rejection, it's trust. He's saying, you don't need another confirmation. You need to move, because delayed obedience is still disobedience. And every day you wait, the enemy sows more doubt, more fear, more hesitation into your heart. But even then, grace steps in, because your God isn't just a speaker, he's a seeker. He's still pursuing you, even when you've stopped listening. He's still whispering when you're too tired to pray. He's still standing outside the door knocking. Like Revelation 3:20 says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in." He's not forcing his way in, but he hasn't walked away either. He's waiting for your heart to lean in, waiting for your yes, waiting for your ears to tune out the chaos and hear the call again. And right now, this very moment, he's speaking again, not through thunder, not through fire, but through this quiet word to your soul. You feel it, don't you? That gentle pressing on your heart, that stirring that says, I'm not done with you, that whisper that reminds you, I'm still speaking. Are you still listening? That's the voice of the shepherd. That's the call to return, to remember, to realign, to rest in the truth that you are loved, chosen, and still being led, even through the fog. You see, this whole time, you've been praying for answers, but God's been speaking something better. Direction. You wanted details. He gave you presents. You wanted blueprints. He gave you daily bread, because He's not raising robots who follow formulas. He's raising sons and daughters who walk by faith, who learn to trust His character when His voice goes quiet, who don't need the whole map, just the next step. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path." That's not passive. That's the most radical kind of trust there is. And trust is built in the quiet, in the middle of the wilderness, in the nights when the heavens feel silent and your prayers feel unanswered. That's where God is still speaking, not through volume, but through presence, not through thunder, but through intimacy. He's not shouting over your life. He's whispering into it, because He's not trying to impress you. He's trying to draw you, not to a plan, but to a person, to Himself. That's what this whole thing is about, relationship. And when you get that, when you realize His voice is more than instruction, it's invitation, everything changes. You stop chasing signs and start listening for His Spirit. You stop panicking when things don't make sense, because you know the shepherd is still leading, even when it's dark. Psalm 23:4 says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." That's what His voice carries, the reassurance that He is with you. You don't walk alone. You don't suffer unseen. You don't obey in vain. But now, it's your turn, because a voice is only half of the equation. The rest depends on ears that are willing, on hearts that are open, on lives that say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." 1 Samuel 3:10. That's the posture that unlocks heaven. That's the position that shifts atmospheres. That's the moment where your life moves from religion to revelation. Because when you hear God clearly, you stop living safely. You stop negotiating with your calling. You stop settling for survival and step into surrender. And that surrender, it's terrifying and holy. Because when you truly start listening, God doesn't just speak comfort. He speaks calling. He speaks stretching. He speaks sacrifice. He speaks the one thing your flesh doesn't want to hear. Follow me, not just to the platform, but to the cross. Not just to the spotlight, but to the secret place. Not just into purpose, but into pruning. Because He doesn't call you to easy. He calls you to eternal. And that call, that's where the fire lives. And here's the truth you've felt in your spirit, but been afraid to admit. You've already heard Him. You just haven't moved yet. Not because you don't believe, but because you're scared. Because the voice told you to leave something you love, to forgive someone who broke you, to start something without a safety net, to lay down something you've built in your own strength. And it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. But it's Him. And deep down, you know it. So now the only question is, will you listen? Not just hear, but obey. Will you let the voice of God disrupt your plans? Rearrange your timelines? Ruin your comfort? Because if you will, if you dare to follow that whisper, everything changes. Not all at once, but little by little. Suddenly, clarity begins to flood in. Suddenly, provision starts showing up in unexpected places. Suddenly, Doors you didn't knock on start swinging open, because heaven backs what it speaks. God funds what He starts, and obedience is always the currency of breakthrough. But don't get it twisted. Breakthrough isn't just external, it's internal. The real miracle isn't what changes around you, it's what changes in you. Peace where there used to be panic. Boldness where there used to be fear. Joy in the middle of the unknown. That's what happens when you walk with the voice. You start to reflect Him. You start to sound like Him. You start to carry the authority that only comes from communion. And that's what this generation is starving for. Not more influencers, but intercessors. Not louder voices, but more anointed ones. Not noise, but presence. And that's you, if you're willing. If you'll stop treating the voice of God like an optional extra and start treating it like the oxygen you were created to breathe. If you'll stop praying for signs and start praying for stillness. If you'll stop chasing confirmation and start cherishing conversation. Because when God speaks, He's not trying to impress you. He's trying to entrust you. So are you ready? Really ready? Ready to stop listening just for direction and start listening for devotion? Ready to let go of your version of control and step into a life led by whispers? Because when you live by the whisper, you'll find yourself in places you never planned, but exactly where you're needed. You'll walk into rooms and shift atmospheres. You'll speak words that break chains. You'll carry a presence that can't be explained, only encountered. That's what the voice of God produces in a surrendered vessel. So now, not tomorrow, not when you feel qualified, not when it's convenient. Now is the moment. Close your eyes, still your soul, silence the static, and listen, because God is speaking. Are you ready to listen?